The time for silence is over.
And at CPAC this year, a big focus will be on the dangers of the cancel culture.
Administrators in a Virginia school district dropping Dr. Seuss books as part of the annual Read Across America Day.
We're watching Ellen get figuratively and possibly literally canceled.
Impeachment anymore. It's about canceling, as I've said. Canceling the president and anyone that disagrees with them.
Cancel culture, driving people from their jobs, shaming dissenters, and demanding total submission from anyone who disagrees. Maybe we should boycott Starbucks. I don't know.
The Ayatollah can tweet, the president can't.
We ought to boycott Geico.
Nothing's more infuriating than that, except maybe what's happening to Dr. Seuss.
So many people are boycotting Macy's. I love it. I love it.
Dr. Seuss went from being a beloved childhood author to worse than Hitler in just a matter of days.
The lie detector determined that was a lie.
Great, we should boycott fake news CNN. Dealing with them is a total waste of time.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired!
The worst case of cancel culture that I've seen in recent memory. This is amazing.
Because if it could happen to Dr. Seuss, it might happen to you.
Dana, I do not like the treatment of Dr. Seuss. I don't like it in a house with a mouse. I don't like it with a box with a fox. I don't like it here or there. Bill Hemmer, I don't like this anywhere.
So will this insanity run out of steam? Or are these nuts just like Doritos, that no matter how many bags you go through, they keep making more?
Join me every Sunday afternoon for a new show where common citizens, you and I together, discuss with each other issues of today, where we demand proof and evidence is required, where we seek the truth and will not be silent. Join me this coming Sunday afternoon and take part in America's oldest and most honored tradition. Hello and welcome to The Left Speaks. My name is Chris. I'll be your host for today. Today is March the 7th, 2 months, 1 day removed after the insurrection incited by former President Donald Trump on January the 6th, where the Capitol was assaulted and desecrated and looted, and ultimately there were no consequences. Today we're going to go over the newest agenda, distraction, bullshit that Republicans and conservatives are trying to push as the new threat to America. This is what's coming to get you. Don't worry about anything else. Just get outraged that Dr. Seuss got canceled. That Gina Carano from The Mandalorian got let go, or rather had her contract not renewed, by Disney. That Kevin Sorbo of Hercules fame back from the 90s had his Facebook deactivated. I think it was Facebook. It may have been Twitter. That Donald Trump can't jump on Twitter and Facebook and spread lies about election fraud that he can't prove because he's failed in court 60 plus times. This is the threat, America. The new threat that's coming to get you. Don't worry about wealth inequality. Don't worry about raising the minimum wage. Don't worry about the fact that we ignored a global pandemic for the better part of a year and let 500,000 Americans die. Focus on the fact that Donald Trump can't jump on Twitter and spout lies. Focus on the fact that a B-list celebrity from the 90s who played Hercules can't jump on Facebook and spread lies. Focus on the fact that Dr. Seuss got canceled, which we're going to dive into and point out why it's complete and utter BS. Because Dr. Seuss wasn't canceled. Kevin Sorbo wasn't canceled for his political views. And cancel culture, boycotts, voting with your wallet, as demonstrated by the intro video there, is not a new thing. And it certainly isn't a leftist, progressive, democratic thing only. Seems to me like it's pretty obviously used by both sides. But hey, what do I know? This is the new threat. This is what we have to focus on. This is where we're at, America. This is the big problem facing our country. It's a distraction. It's what they're using to get you to not pay attention to the very, very serious and very real problems facing our country. Whether it's voter suppression going on in multiple states now, trying to enact new laws to make sure that all those people that voted against Donald Trump have a little bit tougher time voting next time. Whether it's minimum wage and the fact that raising the minimum wage would also increase the wages of average Americans across the country, as well as those that are working minimum wage jobs, that it would be good in terms of rebalancing our economy so the top 1% don't keep getting everything. No, we have to find some new random bullshit for you to get distracted by so you don't focus on anything important. We're going to spend our entire weekend at CPAC, which was the Conservative Political Action Committee, or as I like to call it, Neo-Fascist Convention, ranting about cancel culture. Because if we fix it, and there's no real way to fix it, you can't force people to buy things or publish things that they don't want to buy or publish. But if we fix it, nothing fundamentally changes. That's it. That's it in a nutshell. Let's get you focused on something that doesn't matter. So let's start going through some of the problems with cancel culture and why it is fake. Literally fake news. So we're going to start with the most recent controversy regarding Dr. Seuss. In case you haven't heard, it's Dr. Seuss's birthday, the author. And 6 of his books, immediately before his birthday, last week, were removed from publication. They're not going to publish them anymore for sale. 6, not all. We're going to go into why, but let's hear from Fox News host Tucker Carlson why this is such a big deal.
Say what you will about Dr. Seuss. Maybe you think his drawings are primitive. Maybe some of his doggerel doesn't actually rhyme. Fair. But Dr. Seuss was not a racist. Dr. Seuss was a preachy liberal. He was an evangelist against bigotry. He wrote an entire shelf of books against racism, and not in a subtle way. They were clearly, explicitly against racism. That was the whole point of writing them, to teach children not to be racist.
Yes, Dr. Seuss's later work was anti-racist. But we're not canceling Dr. Seuss. 6 of his books, 6 out of the dozens that he wrote and published for children, have some problematic images in them, which we'll show and display here in a few minutes. So to pretend like everybody is out there marching in the streets saying ban Dr. Seuss and all of his works because Dr. Seuss is a racist is a flat out lie. That's not what is happening. I don't recall seeing a single protest about banning Dr. Seuss. Maybe I missed it. I mean, was it BDM? BDS? Ban Dr. Seuss? No, it was BLM. It was entirely something different, completely unrelated. That's right. But you can do or say some racist things, learn from those things, have your views evolve, become a better person, and I can still point to your earlier works and say, hey, that stuff's kind of problematic, and then look at your later stuff and be like, hey, this stuff isn't problematic. Seems to me, what's going on here? But not if you listen to Tucker Carlson. If you listen to Tucker Carlson, the entire left is coming to get Dr. Seuss. Beloved Dr. Seuss, who only wrote children's stories to try and teach everybody to get along. That doesn't change the fact that some of his books had some problematic images in them, which again, we're going to get to in a second. We're going to let Tucker Carlson go over why he thinks this is a problem first.
What's surprising is how calculated all this is. Now, conservatives will be tempted to chalk up the attacks on Dr. Seuss to the usual cancel culture gone mad. Look how hysterical and stupid the professional left is. They're even calling Dr. Seuss racist. And you've seen people say that on social media today. But it's totally missing the point. Canceling Dr. Seuss isn't stupid, it's intentional. They're banning Dr. Seuss not because he was a racist, but precisely because he wasn't.
We're banning Dr. Seuss not because he was a racist, but because he wasn't. Okay, the implied lie there is we're banning Dr. Seuss. Again, the company, Dr. Seuss's foundation, decided not to publish 6 of his works that had racial images, racial problems in them. We're not talking about banning all of Dr. Seuss's stuff, and we're not talking about people from the outside saying ban Dr. Seuss. We're talking about the company itself, Dr. Seuss's foundation that's responsible for all of his works, deciding not to publish 6 of his books. Nobody has come out and said everything Dr. Seuss ever did was racist. I'm not even aware of anybody coming out and saying Dr. Seuss himself was a racist. I am aware of the company that publishes his books, his own foundation, choosing not to publish these books in order to protect their brand. Again, not all of them, just the ones that have some problems.
In 1961, Dr. Seuss wrote a story called The Sneetches. Martin Luther King's March on Washington was still 2 years away, but Dr. Seuss's story captured its essence. In case you haven't already read it to your kids 50 times and know it by heart, here's the plot. There's a group of furry, pear-shaped animals called Sneetches who live on what looks like a faraway planet. Now, if that sounds weird to you, be aware that Dr. Seuss rarely drew people, probably because he didn't want to elevate one kind of person over any other kind of person. He wasn't a racist. In any case, there are 2 groups of Sneetches in the story. those with star-shaped designs on their stomachs and those without. There's no real difference between the two groups, but the Sneetches don't know that. They're convinced that stars are all important. So they spend the entire story jockeying for position based on the relative starness. At various points in the story, stars on the stomach are deemed socially favorable. At others, they're considered a mark of disgrace. And the Sneetches run around frantically trying to keep up with the changing demands of star fashion, until they realize in the uplifting final pages of the story that none of it matters. Underneath the stars, they're all the same. They're all Sneetches. Who cares who's got a star? What matters isn't the group you come from. What matters is you. Even a 5-year-old gets the point of the story. At the deepest level, it doesn't matter what we look like, because underneath it all, we're all the same. We're all human beings. We're in this together. All that outward appearance stuff is pointless. It just makes people hate each other, and it makes us look ridiculous.
Dash Mickey, welcome back. The chat window will catch up in a minute. Why are they blaming the left? The short version is this doesn't make any sense. Dr. Seuss is a beloved children's author that has been included in generations of children's lives, and all of a sudden they have a problem with what's being published, and their reason is because he wrote on being anti-racist. No, this is Tucker Carlson misleading you. And welcome back to the show. I appreciate you. There were 6 books that were banned. This is contradictory, seeing as there are people who consider racism to no longer exist. Which is why Tucker is arguing that nothing should be canceled. So the short version is, let me pull it up for you so you can see it. The canceled titles are And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street, If I Ran the Zoo, McElligot's Pool, On Beyond Zebra, Scrambled Egg Super, and The Cat's Quizzer.
In 1961, Dr. Seuss wrote a story called The Sneetches. Martin Luther King's March on Washington was...
So you have to be careful with Tucker there, because as you noticed, he's telling you the wonderful story of a book that Dr. Seuss wrote that wasn't canceled. He doesn't make that explicitly clear, and he allows you to assume that it was. So the implied assumption is, why would anybody cancel this particular story? It's a wonderful story about how everybody should ignore what's on the surface and realize we're all the same underneath. I agree. The Dr. Seuss Foundation agrees. That's why this isn't one of the canceled books. This is one of the ones that promotes the Dr. Seuss brand in a good, reasonable manner. That promotes what Dr. Seuss was about at the tail end of his life. This is not how Dr. Seuss started. Dr. Seuss grew over the course of his lifetime, which is a good thing. The books that were canceled contain some images that are problematic. So out of the 6 books that were canceled, let's look at what was in them. This is one of the books, And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street. Oh, don't do that. Live show, gotta love it. One of the images that people had problems with. Stereotypical depictions of people regarding their race. Not a major issue, but I could see why somebody might have some issues with that one. Again, the stereotyped image. The stereotyped image. Now, mind you, these aren't books that are being marketed to you and me. These are books that are being read to children. So the idea is maybe we shouldn't stereotype other races to kids who haven't fully developed yet, who it's difficult to understand these concepts for. And when you can look at an image and kind of tell immediately what race of people is being stereotyped, it sets off a few flags. This is from a second book, McElligott's Pool. Pretty sure they're referring to Eskimos. If I Ran the Zoo was one of the other ones that was removed from publication. Again, some stereotypical images of Asians. Stereotypical image of an Arab gentleman. My favorite one is the stereotypical image of black people. Let me see if I can move this off to the side so you can see it a little bit more clearly. All they're doing is setting restrictions on how our children should be raised. How is it setting restrictions on how children should be raised? And who specifically is setting these restrictions? Another stereotypical image of an Arab gentleman. And the whole point, again, by the Dr. Seuss Foundation here, is that maybe surface level things shouldn't be the first thing a child thinks of when they realize that their friend is Arab or black. It's not something the Dr. Seuss Foundation wants associated with their brand anymore. Mouse and Twitch aren't cooperating one moment. Yeah, no problem. One of the most encouraged habits for children is reading. I agree. Nobody's saying that the children shouldn't read. Again, Dr. Seuss Foundation is talking about removing 6 books here. That still leaves dozens of other ones to choose from that don't have problematic stuff. Would I rather my son read something regarding the sneeches about how everybody's equal and what's on the surface shouldn't matter? Or would I rather him be looking at these kinds of images? Dr. Seuss being the first books for beginning readers. Exactly, and that's the reason why it's more important to be as neutral as possible. That way you're not indoctrinating the kids. You're not providing images for the kids to jump on and associate in their head with Arabs, Eskimos, black people, classifying people by race. That's the point. That's why Dr. Seuss Foundation doesn't want these books published anymore. That's one of two reasons. Nobody's talking about canceling green eggs and ham here. Hey, Smitty Swag, what's going on? Welcome to the show. Yeah, nobody's talking about canceling Green Eggs and Ham or The Cat in the Hat. Those aren't problems, or, those aren't books that have problematic images in them. Furthermore, nobody's talking about people, you, me, protesters, organizing and going and canceling these books. That's not what's under discussion. We're talking about the people that own the rights to these books choosing to take 6 books off the shelf. That's what's going on. Dr. Seuss beat his wife and portrayed Chinese people in yellow and had slurs in his books. I'm happy they discontinued it. Yeah, they discontinued the 6 books that had problematic images. Even more basically, there was a huge unspoken reason to cancel these things from the Dr. Seuss Foundation's point of view. Classic children's books are perennial bestsellers. They sold 338,000 copies of Green Eggs and Ham across the United States. One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish, man, I thought I could get that on the first try, sold 311,000 copies. Oh, The Places You'll Go sold 513,000 copies. They're still publishing those. They're not removing them. To Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street, one of the 6 books they did decide to quit publishing, sold about 5,000. McElligot's Pool, Cat's Quizzer, haven't sold in years through major retailers. So again, we're not talking about removing like Green Eggs and Ham and The Cat in the Hat. The stuff with good messages, like the Sneetches, as Tucker Carlson we saw just misrepresented, implying that it was canceled. We're talking about removing 6 books out of dozens by the owners of those books, not due to public pressure, because they decided publishing that stuff that had some racial problems, racial implications, just wasn't as profitable anymore as it used to be. The stuff that didn't seem to have any racial problems with it still seems to be more profitable. So before this might blow up on us, before it might actually become a problem and affect our brand, and affect the stuff that we're actually making money selling, somebody at the Dr. Seuss Foundation went, maybe it'd be a good idea to quit publishing this shit that's kind of racist or that has some racial stereotypes in it. Smitty Swag, what are your thoughts on the Mr. Potato Head controversy? I think it's hilarious. For those of y'all who are not aware what Smitty is referring to, Hasbro Toys decided to rebrand Mr. Potato Head as just Potato Head. So instead of calling the whole brand Mr. Potato Head, they're just going to call it Potato Head. Okay? They're still, underneath that Potato Head brand, going to be a Mr. and a Mrs. Potato Head. But it's now just going to be Potato Head and then separated. And conservatives all over Twitter went apeshit over the assumed gender of a plastic potato. Last I checked, plastic potatoes don't actually have genders. They just don't. There's no biology to the gender of a plastic potato. So even the conservative argument against transgender issues, that biology dictates all, which there's actually plenty of biological research supporting transgender identities, but even the conservative argument against it doesn't apply to a plastic potato. So yeah, I think it's hilarious. Finn, I'm just going to call you Finn because I don't want to mutilate your name. Welcome to the show. Cancel culture needs to get canceled. The problem is cancel culture has been around for ages. People, as long as there has been capitalism, have literally always voted with their wallets. And actually, this is something that's commonly done by the right, by conservatives. And if you just look at the last, say, 100 years, you've got Christians calling for the boycott of the Beatles because the Beatles, back in the 60s, said that they were more popular than Jesus. You've got Christians calling for the boycott of Harry Potter because it's going to teach people witchcraft, and there's real spells and witchcraft in Harry Potter. You've got conservatives losing their shit over the Dixie Chicks, the #1 country band at the time, not 30 years ago, coming out against the Iraq War. This isn't some new leftist threat. It's just been an ongoing thing. Hell, Trump himself called for multiple cancellations. Mob mentality is extremely dangerous. In India, people die from cancel culture. You're going to have to be more specific what you're referring to. Dash Mickey, I'm still confused on why it is called cancel culture. So the idea or the threat that is being presented is that when the mass of the country decides that a particular thing or person should be canceled, that's a threat because you're opening it up to mob rule. Smitty, cancel culture has been on both sides. Absolutely correct. And I don't know how you avoid it in a democracy. Furthermore, I don't know how you avoid it in capitalism. So in this particular instance for Dr. Seuss, okay, the capitalist owners of the product noticed it wasn't selling, noticed it could be an issue for them going forward in terms of popularity of their brand, so it could affect their other sales. And they chose voluntarily, not under pressure, to quit publishing their work. Not all of their work, just the stuff that would have problems. What's the answer to this if you think it's an issue? Is the government supposed to go in and force the Dr. Seuss Foundation to publish these 6 books that weren't selling? Or are we just supposed to be outraged and go, oh, there's nothing you can do? Does a business have the right to choose to discontinue a product that's not selling anymore. If they don't, are we going to start applying this to other stuff? If I open a bakery and I make one cake that sells a whole lot, and I make another cake that tastes like dog crap, I probably should quit selling the second cake. That's just a normal business decision. In this case, that's exactly what the Dr. Seuss Foundation chose to do. These are examples of conservative cancellations. Absolutely. In the Dr. Seuss case, even though conservatives were the ones that were outraged by it, it's literally a business decision. The business made the decision. Finn, your other comment got auto-modded. Try to reword it, brother. Wouldn't it be capitalism and free speech? Smitty, you're going to have to clarify exactly what you mean by that. Because again, the government didn't come in and say that Dr. Seuss couldn't publish this stuff anymore. So it's not a free speech issue. Dash Mickey, I can see the reason behind canceling those books. So can I. Now, the reason this is becoming such a big concern, A, it's an excellent distraction for Republicans and conservatives in the United States from things that actually matter, like raising the minimum wage, like securing voter rights protections, things that would make a difference in the lives of average Americans. You know, winterizing the grid in Texas, the electrical grid, so, people weren't without power for days. And it's convenient because you've had a lot of Republicans and conservatives have their social media accounts blocked recently because they were spreading false information. They weren't blocked because of their political views, the most obvious example being Donald Trump. He was blocked for literally spreading false information about the election, specifically regarding fraud. Furthermore, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram all waited to ban his account until after he'd failed in court to prove his case 60 plus times. But that makes it a very convenient thing for Republicans and conservatives to lose their minds about right now. WhatsApp group chats leading to killing of Muslim butchers. Lots more examples. So you're talking about a bunch of individuals advocating for violence. I'm not sure how that results to cancel culture, Finn. Because I agree with you to a certain extent. If a bunch of leftists had started a private chat to go blow up the Dr. Seuss building, I would have a problem with it. If a bunch of leftists had started a private chat to go, I don't know, storm the United States Capitol and loot the building, I would have a problem with it. But that's not cancel culture, or at least that's not what Republicans and conservatives in the United States of America are pointing to as cancel culture. Like the owners of the company's freedom of speech to discontinue the books. Basically, they can do whatever they want, and it's their right. Essentially correct with the way the United States is set up currently. And I don't think I would want the United States government to come in and say, you have to publish this particular piece of work, even though it's not profitable for you anymore, and even though it doesn't represent your views anymore. I think most people grow over the course of their lifetime. There are things you may have thought as a child that you no longer think as an adult. there are things you might have thought was a good idea at 14 that you no longer think is the case at 24 or 30. Hell, you may have written love letters to your high school girlfriend. If you're currently married at 25, you're probably not publishing that content every day because your views have kind of changed a little. And that's okay. But I would love to hear the opposite side of this argument, Finn. Hey, Feston, welcome to the chat. Appreciate you joining the show. I don't know what you're referring to when you say vote jury team. So feel free to clarify and specify. Now, to show this isn't new,
the United States and our allies are authorized to use force in ridding Iraq of weapons of mass destruction.
Behind the growing buildup to war, there's also a growing anti-war movement.
We're ashamed the President of the United States is from Texas.
You support the Dixie Chicks or supporting traitors? Move to France, Dixie Chicks!
Try not to be judgmental of the president. I'll tell you why. He's got sky-high approval. The war couldn't be going better.
The people who got it all started was a right-wing group called the Free Republic.
They should send her to Iraq, strap her to a bomb, and just drop her over Baghdad.
They're attempting to manipulate the American media, and the American media is falling for it.
The Red Cross wouldn't take $1 million from us.
Well, you do know that George W. Bush is the honorary chairman.
The radio station set up these garbage cans for people to throw out their CDs.
They had the hottest song in the country, and it died.
All these radio stations, they won't play them. We call and ask, and they won't.
We are a confederation of 270 individual stations.
You made a decision from corporate headquarters that was binding on your DJ.
Mr. Chairman.
And just prior to that, you say that you're an independent radio station. That's a total contradiction.
Says Natalie Maines will be shot dead Sunday, July 6th.
The Viral Center is working with police to provide extra security surrounding the Dixie Chicks concert.
It's easy for people to write ugly things and hateful things, but when somebody hates you so much for what you say that they want to kill you.
USA! USA! USA!
We're a sisterhood. We go through the good, the bad, and the ugly all together.
From the two-time Academy Award-winning director Barbara.
So yeah, this is not some new thing in this country. You can go back and look at the same thing with the Beatles. You can go back and look at a lot of protest music in the 60s. You can look at Harry Potter. Conservative Christians losing their mind about the publication of Harry Potter books because they promoted witchcraft. Hell, you can look at Donald Trump recently. Remember the whole fire the NFL players bit?
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired! Some owner's gonna do that. He's gonna say, that guy that disrespects our flag, he's fired. And that owner, they don't know it. They don't know it. They're friends of mine, many of them. They don't know. They'll be the most popular person for a week. They'll be the most popular person in this country.
Feston, thank you for the follow. Anybody else that's enjoying the content, if you would like to follow, I would greatly appreciate it. Every Sunday, 2 to 4 p.m., we're also on YouTube and Facebook, so feel free to check us out. Phone calls, line is toll free, always open. Anybody is more than welcome to call in. People who disagree get priority. Smitty Swag, yeah, I used to agree, or I used to be a hard conservative when I was 13, 14, watching people like Ben Shapiro and Louder with Crowder. Yeah, Steven Crowder. It's the alt-right pipeline that is really ruining our generation, and it's sad to see some people never grow out of it. It stops us from progressing as a people. I completely agree with you. The fact that especially Crowder and Shapiro tend to abuse the hell out of statistics and manipulate the people they are talking to, and then people look at it and think it's reality-based, is really hurting our national discourse. Steven Crowder specifically will go to college campuses prepared on a subject, like I want to talk about race in America, and sit in front of a desk in front of everybody with a sign that basically says, there's no racial problems in the United States of America, change my mind. And then random college kids will walk by, for those of you who aren't familiar, and we'll go try to talk to him about it. Now, first off, it doesn't matter the subject or the view you want me to argue. If I know what I'm going to talk about, and I have time to do research, pull studies, memorize statistics, I can go sit in a grocery store or a college campus or a courtroom and probably know more about any particular subject than the average person walking by, you know, that didn't know that they were going to be jumping into a debate on that topic that day. Then, if you let me pick which conversations and interviews I'm going to air, well, I can make myself look really good. And that's Crowder's whole bit. I do think people on the left, we're not always right. Don't get me wrong. But I think that alt-right pipeline you're referring to, of just dunking on people and easy answers to complicated topics, is seriously hurting our national discourse. Ben Shapiro's answer to global warming, and I'm not making this up, you can feel free to look it up. Oh, well, you know, people that own beachfront property, it's going to raise the sea levels and all this sort of stuff. They won't be affected. They can just sell their homes and move to somewhere else. That's the way capitalism works. Ben, my man, if you raise the sea level, beachfront property isn't beachfront anymore. It's underwater. Nobody's buying it. But it's these easy, quick answers that you have to think about just a little bit. Dash Mickey, I fail to see how it promoted witchcraft, but okay. Referring to Harry Potter, it's because it had spells in it, and the kids were all witches, and the kids that were witches were the good ones, right? That's the conservative Christian argument, not every Christian. Smitty Swag, Crowder picks on college kids for the most part. So does Ben Shapiro, honestly. Most of them tend to go to college campuses a lot and be very well prepared on a topic when the average member of their audience is not going to be. I may have read an argument 5-10 years ago, done a lot of research into a particular topic. Hell, we can go back to college, right? I may have aced that exam on college algebra 15, 20 years ago, whatever it was, 10 years ago, right? But if you gave me the same exam today, hell, I might get a C or I might fail just because I haven't used it in 10 years. That doesn't mean that the conclusions, the answers I reached back then when I was actively studying it are incorrect. Just means that I don't remember them. But again, give me time to prepare on it. I know what I'm talking about. It's a whole different ballgame. And Crowder and Shapiro both tend to avoid those situations. Now, to jump back into how cancel culture is not a new thing, a brief history of batshit conservative boycotts. Because remember, the claim is this is a new threat from the left. So I'm not touching on all of them. I'm just showing that this is a normal thing. (1966). Christians burn records they already paid for to own John Lennon. This is going back to, in the 1966, an interview John Lennon made an offhand comment that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. Set off a firestorm in the Bible Belt. And that was in the intro trailer. You saw some of it. People breaking records, holding signs, protesting, calling for the Beatles to be canceled. The Klan, which was particularly offended by comments from the same interview that criticized segregation, nailed Beatles records to a burning cross. Oh boy, those are people. Why is it that conservatives seem to always get associated with the Klan? I mean, it's really disturbing at this point. Why do we keep finding common cause with the KKK on the conservative end of things? I mean, this goes back to the 60s. And if you're, yeah, that's a problem. The outcome was poetic. The next album sold twice as many copies in the United States as its predecessor. 1979, White Sox fans purchased disco records and then burned them to own the concept of disco music. I forget who said it, but there was an author. Wrong button. I believe it was an author that basically said, you know what, you can burn as many copies of my books as you want to, as long as you buy them first. Man, if you want to burn disco records, as long as you pay for the records first, the CDs first, the tapes first, I don't think a single artist is going to care that you're burning their stuff. Not a one. Well, they'll care all the way to the bank, and then the amount of time it takes you to go buy the next copy to burn. Conservatives are all for politically incorrect jokes until it hits them. Exactly. That's a large part of it. And the consistent outrage over trying to equalize races and trying to get rid of racial stereotypes kind of bothers me. Like, why is that? Why does it always seem to come back to that? (2015) Eric Erickson shoots his copy of the New York Times with a gun to protest gun control. RedState.com editor Eric Erickson shot 7 bullets into his copy of the newspaper. Okay, so I'm going to bet RedState.com is probably a conservative website. I'm going to bet that the editor of RedState.com, who would shoot a newspaper because it disagreed with his views, is probably a conservative. So I think it's fair to include this. Creamy Boy, all cops are bastards. I think The Job puts cops in a terrible situation, and it's not a job you should be doing. I think there are much better ways to address policing in this country than the systems we currently have. That was a joke. I can see the argument from the people that make the statement. If you're talking about The Job overall, it's like people who were in the German army during World War II. They're furthering a cause here that we don't want furthered. I think there's serious reforms that need to be done to the police department. I don't think every individual cop is an asshole or a bastard, just to clarify. But you're more than welcome to make jokes. Welcome to the show, man. I appreciate you tuning in. Clark Draper, thank you for the like. Now, to clarify on the police statement, I don't think that there's a need for police to have military vehicles rolling down our streets. MRAPs specifically, multi-million-dollar mine-resistant vehicles. I think that's a little bit of overkill. I mean, call me crazy. I don't think that you and I, as citizens of this country, if we're worried about our mother in a different state or our grandmother in a different state, should be calling somebody with a gun to go check on them and see if they're okay. I think there should, maybe be a social worker or something we could call to go knock on grandma's door and do a wellness check. I don't think a gun is required to write a traffic ticket. I'm not saying that there's not a need in some cases, some extremely limited cases, for an armed response, but I don't think it should be the default answer for as many things as we use them for. Jeff Mitchell, welcome to the show. I appreciate it. Glad to see you back. To recap those who have just tuned in, we're basically going over how cancel culture is not a new thing. It has been consistent throughout, I'd say the last 60 to 100 years in this country. It's not some new leftist threat. And the fact that Republicans and conservatives, specifically Fox News, not all conservatives, are representing it as such is nothing but a distraction and a bunch of BS. Both sides engage in it, but conservatives, especially right now, are misrepresenting the heights of it. Anarcho Taco, thank you for the follow. November 2016, Breitbart readers flushed cereal down the toilet because Kellogg's pulled their ad from the site. So Kellogg's cereal decided it did not want to advertise on Breitbart.com anymore. So a bunch of readers of Breitbart, a conservative media source, that's being generous, it would almost border on propaganda in my opinion, started a Twitter hashtag to dump Kellogg's as revenge for canceling their advertising on a conservative news site. And I use the word news most generously here because I don't consider most of Breitbart to be news. Again, going back to the author thing, if you want to keep buying my cereal, to flush it down the toilet, to pay me again to buy my cereal, to flush it down the toilet, I've got no problems with that. Hell, if you want to cancel me, I'll start producing some cereal right now. You can send me all the money you want. I will ship you all the cereal you want. You can video flushing it down the toilet as much as you want. You will not hurt my feelings, I promise you. Going to have to take exception to your comment about a cop not needing a weapon when stopping a vehicle to potentially write a ticket. Okay, feel free to make your argument there, Jeff. Anarcho Taco, cancel culture isn't real. There's deplatforming, there's consequences, and there's Twitter drama that has no bearing on the real world. How many things and people has organized religion tried to cancel? Excellent point. Organized religion has tried to cancel a lot of things in a lot of different places. Cancel culture, I think, is overhyped. I think things are canceled, but I don't think that makes it an overall canceling thing. Okay, but I believe, from Creamy Boy, I missed that. Sorry. Okay, but I believe they should, because no matter what they're responding to, it can go bad in a matter of seconds. So you think all cops should be armed regardless instead of having a separate force that would not be armed? And then Smitty Swag disagrees with you. If someone is having a mental breakdown, you don't want to send somebody with a weapon. For example, Salt Lake City police shot and killed a boy with autism. It would be more appropriate to send a social worker. As a child of the former police officer and considering the way people, I think you cut your comment off there, Jeff. How did we start talking about cops? I believe it was Creamy Boy that said all cops are bastards, but we're at the chat phase of the show, so I don't mind bouncing around a little bit. And Jeff, revenge is a terrible reason for commentary and advertising. Hey, it worked. They bought more Kellogg's. I would say Kellogg's canceling their advertising on Breitbart.com was a more successful advertisement than actually advertising on Breitbart.com, apparently. I'm going to wait on Jeff to hit his argument for police officers always needing to be armed during traffic stops, and then we'll go from there. In the meantime, we'll continue the crazy batshit conservative cancellations. September 2017, racists set their own NFL jerseys and season tickets on fire to own players who kneeled during the national anthem. November 2017, Fox News viewers destroy their Keurig coffee makers because the company pulled their ads from Hannity. Are there any more things recently besides Dr. Seuss that falls under cancel culture? A few things, according to conservatives. You can look to Donald Trump being banned from Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. They wrap that in under cancel culture. Jim Jordan, the representative from Texas, I may have that name slightly off, called the whole second impeachment a cancel culture moment, trying to erase Donald Trump. Gina Carano made a bunch of statements on Twitter that caused Disney not to renew her contract. That was the female co-star in The Mandalorian for Disney. Disney chose not to renew her contract over those. My understanding is that they had a few conversations with her. Hey, basically, you need to quit antagonizing this situation. And Disney very strongly protects its brand. Prior to her not listening to this advice from her employer, they were setting up to spin off her into her own show as a lead. She didn't listen. Disney chose not to renew her contract. Conservatives will point to that as cancel culture as well. Jeff Mitchell, I believe an officer should have the ability to effectively protect themselves in the public regardless of the situation they're presented with. And no, I don't think all officers need to be armed. Then Jeff, you and I actually tend to agree on this. I don't know if you missed my statement. I can see situations where officers need to be armed. I think they are very limited. I could see other situations, the majority of situations, I would argue, where officers do not need to be armed. If we had a separate uniform, separate car color for officers who wrote traffic tickets, and all they did was write traffic tickets, I don't see even a hardened murderer shooting the traffic ticket guy. And the reason I say that is tons of cities have parking meter officers that drive around and write parking tickets all day. They don't carry guns. They don't try to enforce arrests of people they pull over or people that they write a ticket for. And as a result, you don't see many murderers or people that are on the run from the law when they get a traffic ticket blowing away the traffic cop or the meter maid person. So again, I think there's a lot of situations where the jobs that we've put on police officers are not appropriate to what they should actually be used for. Now, you're talking an active shooter situation? Absolutely. Cops should be armed, or you should have a force to deploy for that. But if you're talking about like serving an eviction notice, just banging on the door and saying, hey, here's your eviction notice, I don't see a reason for that officer to be armed. I just don't. And even if I assume the criminal, you know, that the person being, even if I assume the person being evicted is a hardened criminal, if the person serving the eviction notice is wearing an easily identifiable uniform that's obviously not an armed police officer that's not going to arrest them there on the spot, they literally know you're just going to hand them a sheet of paper, there's no incentive for the hardened criminal to blow them away. Anarcho Taco, every comedian that gets canceled almost immediately score a Netflix special to tell the same bad jokes. Yeah, I agree. And if they don't, they just do like Gina Carano did and hop on YouTube with Ben Shapiro and try and go into that crowd. I also believe we've gone too far in arming our police. There we go. There we agree entirely. I see no reason for the police to have mine-resistant anti-personnel vehicles rolling down the streets of, you know, any American citizen or American city. Who is that one chick starts with an H? Heidi, I don't know who you're referring to. Smitty Swag, just look at the stand-up category on Netflix. 90% of them are writing the cancel culture outrage. I think that's a big problem with our media overall today and our entertainment in terms of related to political discussion, is it seems like a lot of it has just gotten to where it's outrage culture more so than cancel culture. People don't want to dive deep into issues. They just want to find a reason to be angry. So like the original, for those who tuned in a little late, the original topic of the show was, why are conservatives so upset about Dr. Seuss getting canceled? And as we pointed out, Dr. Seuss didn't get canceled. 6 books are no longer being published. That decision was made without massive outside pressure by the Dr. Seuss Foundation. It also happens to be 6 books that weren't selling particularly well. To wrap that up into cancel culture is just misleading people. But it lets people get angry, because if you hear Dr. Seuss got canceled by the woke left, why in the hell would you cancel children's TV or children's book series? Kids need to learn how to read. Well, I agree, but that's not what happened. You're being lied to and you're being misled. Sizakov, welcome to the show. Today, Biden sent B-52 bombers over the Persian Gulf. Everyone who voted for Biden is guilty in these bombardments. Okay, so this is a perfect example of the outrage culture I'm talking about. You didn't explain why. You didn't point to a source of, you know, what caused it. I mean, if I can totally see sending B-52 bombers over the Persian Gulf if, you know, an American base was under attack, or if Iran was getting to, ready to invade Iraq and push all the way down into Kuwait and Saudi Arabia again. You need to provide some context, not just one statement to try and get people angry. This is a show where evidence and facts matter. But welcome to the show. You are more than welcome to present your facts and evidence. Everyone who voted for Biden is guilty in these bombardments. Okay. Biden literally saying that he wouldn't bomb Syria. Don't blame the strike on Biden voters. Bozo from CM Smitty Swag. I tend to agree with you, but Biden does have a history of being pretty interventionist. That being said, we had a ton of drone strikes under Trump too, and we were selling weapons to Saudi Arabia and the whole Yemen thing. So it's not like Trump exactly, did great in this area either. Though admittedly he did better. I think the drone strikes actually increased under Trump, but I'll need to look that up for the next show. Sizakov, 2 things. A, would you mind trying to phonetically spell out your name for me? Because I don't want to keep mispronouncing it, and I'm pretty sure I am. B, to read your statement, I am a Muslim, you Americans mass annihilate us. I don't agree with all of America's foreign policy interventions in the Middle East. I've voted against a ton of them. So I can see where you're coming from. Anarcho Taco, thank you for the lurk mode. Anarcho Taco, cancel manufactured consent. Yes, I agree with you. Sizikov, why Biden didn't close Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib. How much Muslims you want to torment more? I'm going to read that as, how much more do you want to torment Muslims? I don't want to torment Muslims at all. Period. As Jeff Mitchell pointed out, drone strikes were upped. Under Trump, man sorties were way down. I considered Biden to be the lesser of two evils overall for my country. That does not mean I agree with everything he does or that Biden is perfection. But I'm not going to let perfection be the enemy of improvement. Dash Mickey, thank you to me. You're more than welcome. Americans are naive and uneducated. That's why you choose according to your emotion and don't use your mind. I'm just going to call you Chekhov. Okay, so some Americans sure are absolutely uneducated and naive. That does not make all Americans uneducated and naive. You can't argue from the specific to the general. That's a fallacy. It doesn't work. That would be like me saying some Americans have blonde hair, therefore all Americans have blonde hair. It doesn't work that way. So you need a better argument, first off. Second off, sure, some Americans choose according to emotion. But plenty of us do our best to use our minds. That doesn't mean we're going to get it absolutely correct all the time. As Smitty Swag pointed out, who else do we vote for? Voting third party in this country is the waste of a vote. We must vote for the lesser of the two evils. And he's absolutely correct. We have a nation where whoever gets the most votes by one vote wins the whole thing, and everybody else gets zero representation. So you could have the extremely progressive pacifist party in this country. You could have the neoliberal, but still want to intervene in this country. And you could have the full-blown imperialist in this country. Now, let's say the peaceful side has a majority. If they divide their vote 25-25, then the full-blown imperialists win every time with 50% of the vote. And that's who gets what they want. So Smitty Swag is absolutely correct. We have to vote in this country for the lesser of two evils and keep moving in the direction of progress. Jeffrey Mitchell, DOD, December public information release around the 19th of December is my source. Excellent source. Thank you. I remembered it off the top of my head, but I don't have it linked. If Americans are ever held accountable for their crimes, then God have mercy, because your victims will not. Check off. Okay, you still haven't addressed any of the problems that we've pointed out in your reasoning. I doubt anybody in this chat is advocating going and blowing up innocent Muslim people in the Middle East. So you're arguing against a straw man right off the bat, my friend. Dash Mickey, personally, I didn't vote from emotion. I voted based on how I wanted my country to run, using my mind. I'm sorry for what's happening on the Persian Gulf, but I didn't vote for that to happen. I voted for somebody who wouldn't ultimately destroy my country. The other problem with that, or I agree with your statement overall, Dash Mickey. The one problem I have with it is, again, Chekhov hasn't provided any context to the situation with the B-52s that he's even referring to. They may be going there for something you and I and other members of chat would actually agree with, but we don't know and he hasn't clarified even though he's been asked to. My bet is there might be a reason for that. Americans are all the same guilty like the Germans who voted for Hitler. That's just absurd on its face. America doesn't have camps committing mass genocide set up around the Middle East. I can recognize levels of bad from, slightly harmful all the way up to mass genocide. To compare the two as equivalent is, again, an equivocation fallacy. Can you make an argument, provide some evidence, and not use a fallacy, please? Anarcho-taco electoralism is only good for harm reduction and a representative democracy. To an extent, I would agree with that. However, in our system specifically, where it's winner take all, then absolutely you're correct. If more like a German system, you voted for the party, so even if you didn't get, 51%, say you only got 30% of the vote, but you got 30% of the representation in government, then you could make an argument that would disagree with the harm reduction statements you made. But in the American system, I completely agree with you. Smitty Swag, you are acting like we sent the missiles to Chekhov, because you voted him in that position. Without him, you had no power. Chekhov, who else did we vote for? You aren't even listening to the points being made. He's not. Jeff Mitchell, so let's talk about the issue with our leadership. The real issue is that the American people have forgotten that there are 538 elected members of Congress, House and Senate. The president is supposed to guide the direction of Congress, not lead by fiat. Yes, I agree. However, when Congress is locked, as the Senate currently is, by the threat of a filibuster, constantly on everything, this is why Alexander Hamilton, one of our founding fathers, warned against the dangers of requiring supermajorities for everything. And that's the position we're in. So you're in the position of having either nothing done or having to get things as much done as you can by fiat. And unfortunately, we have things we have to get done. So that's why you're seeing this. Also, most of Biden's executive orders, off the top of my head, have been just basically removing Trump's executive orders. So it's like Obama and Biden in the previous two terms built a house out of Legos. Trump came in and stuck a bunch of sticky notes on them, trying to pretend like it didn't exist. And now Biden's in office and he's just pulling off the sticky notes. Anarcho Taco, to add further context, I'm Australian, have had mandatory and ranked choice voting for over 100 years here, still a two-party system. I think mandatory voting would help. I'm not Australian. I'm not as familiar with y'all's policies, but I would agree with mandatory voting over here. So y'all do have ranked choice, but you still have a two-party system. There's no viable third parties in your system? Because if so, I'm going to have to reconsider my stance on ranked choice voting. I'll have to look into it more deeply. Chekhov, Americans don't have camps where they kill Muslims. What's with Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib? Have Americans set up camps all over the Middle East to genocide Muslims? Because you drew a direct comparison to Hitler. So please answer that question. Interesting illustration, the sticky note thing. Thanks, Jeff. I mean, the short version is, and this has been known from, I think, Bush forward, when everybody started kind of doing the executive order bit, it doesn't legislate anything, so it's so easy to overturn. The minute you lose the presidential election, the next guy comes in, writes an executive order, or just, makes an executive order rescinding the previous executive order, and it goes away. So an executive order is essentially like a Post-it note. right? You can stick it there, but then somebody else can come right back in and peel it right off. And neither one of them required very much effort. To me, the problem is the filibuster, specifically being as easy as it is in the Senate right now. If we want to go back to the previous rules where you actually had to speak to the subject the entire time and make it slightly difficult to run a filibuster, I wouldn't have as much of a problem with it. But right now, a filibuster is just, hey guys, I'm going to filibuster this. And then it's assumed that you will, and you don't actually have to do anything. So there's no effort involved in actually doing a filibuster in the Senate. And as a result, you need 67 votes to get anything essentially passed, unless you use some parliamentary tricks to do it. So it matters, from Chekhov, so it matters how much camps you got and how much you kill. Really, are you that ill? Everyone is one too much. How long do these camps exist? Longer than any in Germany. If you're going to draw a comparison to a genocide that killed 6 million Jewish people and millions of other people, you're the one that drew the comparison. Me pointing out how absurd it is, and then you saying, yes, it's absurd, I agree. You're not making your argument, you're making mine. Remember where I said there are degrees of evil or degrees of bad? And you can go from slightly harmful to mass genocide? You're the one that jumped to make the comparison immediately to mass genocide, and now you're having to back off of that. And the two camps you're pointing to aren't death camps. I don't agree with what happened in Abu Ghraib, where we tortured prisoners, terrorists, and some not terrorists, as it turned out. But that does not make it the equivalent of Auschwitz. To do so belittles, minimizes what actually happened in Nazi Germany. Dash Mickey, I think mandatory voting would allow voters to be more engaged with voting, but I don't think that would risk the less knowledge of what they're voting for. I think mandatory showing up to the polls would be a good thing. Now, if you're at the polls and you sign your little thing saying, yeah, I was here, and you choose not to vote, I would be okay with that. The Left Speaks, no need to cover on stream, but there is a 10-minute vid that will sell you on a similar but better system than ranked choice voting. Thank you for that, Anarcho Taco. I'll check it out. I'm also taking into account how difficult it would be to reform our electoral system over here overall. And how much from Chekhov again, how much the Americans kill in their wars from Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya. Okay, tons of those aren't in the Middle East. None of those were genocide. None of those are directly comparable to the Nazis during World War II and Hitler. Because if I get to pick like a 50-year span from German history, or hell, any country's history, with a lot of countries, there's going to be 50-year periods I can pick where they were involved in a lot of wars. I mean, heck, let's just pick 50-year history in Germany. 1900 to 1950. That covers World War I and World War II. Again, you're overplaying your argument massively. I can agree with you that Abu Ghraib needed to be dismantled, and the people that were in charge of it and who tortured people should be held accountable and put in Fort Leavenworth, which is the military prison, and that the people that were aware of it and allowed it to happen should also be charged and put in prison. That does not make it the equivalent to Auschwitz, a concentration camp where Jews were gassed to death. And when you try to represent it as such, you look ridiculous. You look like you don't know what you're talking about, and therefore people don't even listen to the initial point you're making, which actually has some truth in it and actually has some merit. You don't know how many millions Americans use fragmentation bombs and napalm, which are banned from the UN. Correct. Jeffrey Mitchell, mandatory voting, yes. Yes, I agree. or not mandatory voting, like I said, mandatory showing up to the polls, you should have the option of saying, screw this whole thing, I don't want to vote. Nazi Germany did the same thing as Americans, and you don't see it. You invade one country after another. America is since 80 years in war. I agree with you that America is doing an imperialism to try to dumb it down. I'm not in favor of invading country after country. You and I agree on this. Okay? That's not the same thing as invading another country to kill all of the people that are there so that my people will have living space. Lebensraum. Okay? That's not a mass genocide. The fact that you can't point to all the camps that are set up to genocide all the people living in the Middle East is direct proof of that, because that's what you need to be able to do. I'm getting a little behind on the chat. Seeing Smitty Swag, response from Dash Mickey. Well, then it would be to push more understanding of how a country's political system works and what sides vote for and believe in. Probably push more education on policy as well. I think pushing education on policy would be an excellent thing. I also think that some kind of penalty for misrepresenting what a policy is needs to be in effect, but I don't know who would enforce that or how it would work. Jeffrey Mitchell or Treblinka or a multitude of others. Exactly. There's a difference between a concentration/death camp. There's a difference between a concentration camp, a death camp, and a prison that had some serious problems in it. Those are all different things. Just like there's a difference between a war to go after natural resources, oil, and a war to go after natural resources and genocide all the people that are living there. To equate them all as equal is just absurd in my face, or in my mind. I know what I'm talking about from Chekhov, because American bombs are flying around our ears while you sit up here and glorify everything. How have I glorified anything? This is the point you're missing. Like I literally just said before you made that comment that I disagree with all the imperialism and the imperialistic wars that the United States has done recently. I wasn't in favor of invading Iraq the second time. You know, the weapons of mass destruction excuse that we kind of knew was bullshit at the time. Okay? Wasn't in favor of it. Voted against it. Voted against Bush when he ran for re-election. That doesn't make it the equivalent of trying to genocide the people that live there. Chekhov, I wish you what you do to us, then you will understand what I mean. Mashallah. Okay, well, in my case, you wish that your population would vote against forever wars. You wish that your population would vote against individuals coming over to your country or coming over to my country and committing violence. You wish for freedom of religion, freedom of expression. You wish people had the right to vote to further those goals. And you hope and wish for criminals to be brought to justice. You also wish people would rely on evidence instead of logical fallacies and hyperbolic statements that when they've been asked to defend multiple times cannot do. You have told me now countless times what you believe. You have yet to address a single reason that would make those things true. You have yet to address a single flaw in your argument that I have pointed out over and over and over again at this point. I'm beginning to think you're incapable of doing so. You have yet to acknowledge that plenty of people in this chat have agreed with you about being opposed to the invasion and the bombs and the wars in your country or in that region. Instead, you just want to go, oh, but it's all Hitler. Which is ridiculous. Which is why you're not accomplishing anything. But if it makes you feel better to come in here and throw a temper tantrum and ignore any flaws in your arguments that people point out to you, myself and others in the chat, like Mickey, like Swag, like Jeff, if it makes you feel better to not accomplish a single thing, by all means, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I've got a 5-year-old, and I've got the patience of a parent when it comes to dealing with temper tantrums of 5-year-olds. Now, if you want to have a rational, reasonable discussion, you are more than welcome. If you're incapable of that, you're welcome to hang out, listen, and learn how to do that. Comrade Tommy, thank you for the follow. A little bit late on that. Apparently it was about 20 minutes ago. I missed it. And a Narco Taco, if I didn't catch you already, thank you for the follow as well. I greatly appreciate it. Sorry for getting derailed there for a second. But Chekhov did have a valid and important point in question, even if he was struggling to make it. We do need to make sure that when our leaders use force, that force is justified, and that if that force is not justified, we need to hold them accountable via removal from office. And ultimately, I would argue, prosecution if necessary. I think the people involved in Abu Ghraib should all be prosecuted, including the senior leadership that was aware of what was going on or allowed it to happen by turning a blind eye. Back to cancel culture. 2018. People mutilating Nike socks and shoes to own Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick was a San Francisco 49ers quarterback who popularized kneeling during the national anthem at NFL games to bring attention to the Black Lives Matter protest movement. The response was to cut out the Nike swoosh on their own socks and shoes, as you can see in the picture here. Colin Kaepernick also was unable to find another team in the NFL, even though he had above average statistics at that point in his career. The Big Kowalski, hi, and welcome to the chat. Or Kawasaki, excuse me. I appreciate you tuning in. For anybody who just tuned in, we're kind of to the chat bounces me all over the place section of the show. The topic is cancel culture. Those questions and answers and statements will be addressed first, but I will address everybody as I can. As always, anybody who has anything to say is more than welcome to call in on the toll-free line. Jeff Mitchell, here, including the senior leadership who were knowledgeable of the circumstances and ultimately the response to the over-the-top actions which ensued. Absolutely, Jeff. You are entirely correct. Anybody who allowed this to happen, was aware of it happening, or allowed the circumstances to occur under which it could happen should face either prosecution, career responsibility over it, removal from the military, depending on what their level of knowledge, oversight, and responsibility was. Full stop. It's not tolerable. Chekhov, the USA is preparing for war against Iran, but there are no uprisings in the United States. When a black man dies as a result of police violence, there are mass protests. It seems we Muslims are not worth it. More reasonable point. I'll grant you that. I also will grant you that something that is happening out of sight of average Americans does tend to be more out of mind. Thank you for the reasonable contribution to the conversation. I don't disagree with you. I do think there needs to be more consideration by the average American in this country on our policy in the Middle East. If you have ideas on how to accomplish that, I am all ears. Jeff Mitchell, can't write my responses fast enough. Brother, that's normal. Big Kawasaki, are you part of the left or right? The show is called The Left Speaks. That's the channel name. I am very much a part of the progressive left. I used to be a conservative. Conservatives in this country moved off into conspiracy theory batshit crazy land. A lot of them, not all. Jeff is a conservative and he and I are friends. We have reasonable discussions all the time. But I have also moved more progressive. I think we are desperately in need of a Teddy Roosevelt style president to reform labor, or reform the balance between labor and capital in this country. Big Kawasaki, so Democrat. I vote Democrat if they have policies that are more progressive. The minute Republicans run a Teddy Roosevelt again, a reform Republican, I will vote for Teddy Roosevelt in a heartbeat. It is not my fault that Republicans are running Marjorie Taylor Greene, who thinks that the California wildfires were started by Jewish space lasers, instead of Teddy Roosevelt, who thinks that Americans, both capitalists and labor, need to get a fair deal and a square deal between them. I don't give a damn about party loyalty. I'm about policy, reality, evidence-based thinking, and logical reasoning. You run Republicans that start buying back into those things, I'll be right there, my friend. Jeff Mitchell, remembering to compromise when possible is a huge thing to keep in mind. The key words there being when possible. The problem I'm having right now with so many Republicans, and again, not you for the chat, because, you know, we've got some new people in the chat here that aren't familiar with your positions. I can't compromise with the Marjorie Taylor Greenes. There is no compromise between, you know, wildfires were started by Jewish space lasers and wildfires were not started by Jewish space lasers. I can't compromise and say, yeah, well, you know, some of the California wildfires were started by Jewish space lasers. There's no compromise to be had there. And unfortunately, a lot of Republicans in elected leadership right now, that they're that type of positions, even though they're not as extreme. But yes, I agree with you. Compromise where possible is a good thing. White supremacy, race realism, dominance theory, social Darwinism is cringe as fuck at the big Kawasaki. I agree, but people need to be able to address the reasons why anarcho taco. I think that for a large part of this country, they assume that Martin Luther King came along in the 60s, made a speech during the civil rights era, and now everybody just knows that all races are equal. And now that you are seeing a pushback in this country against that, from the neo-Nazis, from some more violent members of the alt-right, from the QAnon crowd, the average American in this country isn't prepared to answer those questions or those statements. So they tend to go unchallenged, and they need to be challenged. Chekhov, I try to make that clear to you all the time. Just because it doesn't happen in the U.S. doesn't mean the U.S. isn't as bad as Nazi Germany. Okay, again, we're back to equating two things that are not as bad. You don't know how the Americans behave abroad. There is no greater aggressor than the USA. Even once the greatest threat was not Nazi Germany, today it is the USA. I don't know that I would say greatest threat, but in your particular region, I could absolutely see why you think that, which is, again, why I'm opposed to most of the wars that we have done in your particular region. I was fine with Operation Desert Storm under Bush the First to help remove Iraq from Kuwait, Kuwait wanting the Iraqi army removed from Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia wanting it removed from Kuwait as well. I was fine with Afghanistan, though we stayed there way too long. We should have gone in, gotten Al-Qaeda, and gotten the hell out instead of staying there for, 15 years now at this point. The second Iraq war, I think, was an absolute joke, and we should not have gone. None of that makes it equivalent to what Nazi Germany did. If I were you, I would drop the entire Nazi Germany comparison from your lexicon, because all it does is turn people off, because it's so hyperbolic, it's so extreme that it doesn't illustrate your point. It just makes everybody think that you're ridiculous. And the points you've been making, now that you've toned it down, are more reasonable, and we can have a conversation based off of that. So I don't think you're ridiculous. To clarify, I think you need to drop the Nazi comparison, because it's going to make your audience, the people you are trying to convince, assume you're ridiculous. The big Kawasaki, what do I think about white supremacy, and do I really believe that? You would have to specify what you mean by that. I think white supremacy is ridiculous on its face, to be short. I don't think there are enough genetic differences between races to justify one race being superior to another. Chekhov, there are videos online where the Americans kill a lot of civilians, but it is kept secret. Without WikiLeaks, there would be no official data on it. There are videos online where the Americans shoot civilians from a helicopter and they mock the dead. Yes, and those people should be prosecuted. At the big Kawasaki, do I support BLM? Yes, absolutely. I'll wait for the follow-up question that I already know you're going to have about, violence and all that sort of stuff. So, but go ahead and make it. Jeff Mitchell, got to go. Glad I could tune in for a bit. Jeff, you are always more than welcome. I appreciate you tuning in. Thank you, as always, for following. I appreciate you being such a strong participant in the show. It's always good to have other opinions present. So thank you. Cheers to you as well, my friend. The big Kawasaki, do you have a follow-up to your question about supporting BLM? I was pretty sure you would. Do you want to know why, or do you have an opinion on why I shouldn't? No, I wasn't going to bother because I would know your answer. I was going to ask, don't all lives matter, though? Absolutely all lives matter. The two statements aren't mutually exclusive. Black Lives Matter doesn't say only Black Lives Matter. It says Black Lives Matter also, Black Lives Matter too. And Black lives are, when it comes to police violence, more affected than white lives per capita. That's the problem. Anarcho-taco Nazi lives don't matter. I don't tend to disagree with you. That being said, there's a black gentleman that's gone around, like, you know, saving people from the KKK and helping them get out and helping neo-Nazis see the error of their ways and those sort of things. If you're equipped to have the conversation, I do think it is a good thing to have the conversation with those people, provided you can do it safely. By have the conversation, I don't mean pull a Rubin report where you let these guys come on and spout all their nonsense completely unchallenged and just let everybody see it, and it looks like you don't have the ability to answer everything, so this stuff must be true. I think it's good to have conversations where you can point out the errors in the thinking. I'm white. I don't want people saying white lives matter or Hispanic lives matter, because all lives matter. Okay. So, when it's your birthday and somebody comes up to you and says, "Happy birthday," should they not say that because all birthdays matter? Or does it come into, you know, consideration that you're experiencing a special circumstance? No True Leftist. Hello, hello. Welcome to the stream, my friend. I appreciate you being here. We've kind of moved from cancel culture a little bit. We're on Black Lives Matter right now with Big Kawasaki. But as always, we're at the stage of the show where chat kind of drags me all over the place, which is more than welcome. I enjoy that. But comments on cancel culture get first priority if we get too busy. But again, I appreciate you tuning in, my friend. Anarcho-taco deprogramming takes a lot of mental energy, but since the right co-opts the language of the left, the ideas can be mapped onto proper theory, like states' rights to regional self-governance. I tend to agree with you. The right rebrands a lot, especially on the extremely far right, talking about the Nazi stuff. You go from Nazi to identitarian to white nationalism to white supremacy to ethno-state conversations, and they're all ultimately pointing back to the same thing. I do agree that it takes a lot to deprogram an individual. Usually, if you're talking to somebody one-on-one, I would view that as a goal of more deprogramming, if you have the ability, like I said, to do that. If you're engaging somebody in a public forum, I think it's more about addressing the arguments and pointing out the ridiculousness of them for the audience, for the people on the fence. My goal or my intent at that point is not to, like, pretend you were, on the Rubin report, right? My goal is not to deprogram Stefan Molyneux or Richard Spencer or any of these white supremacist types. My goal is to point out why what they believe is ridiculous so that nobody else gets programmed. The problem I have is, like I said, with people who platform these people and don't challenge them. Smitty Swag, the focus is not on all lives matter. Black Lives Matter means that black lives have been historically discriminated against, and they still are to this day. Your life does matter, and no one is saying it doesn't matter. The focus is on black lives at the moment and how they are treated in the world. No true leftist. Remember when conservatives and corporations canceled Michael Phelps for hitting the bong? Absolutely right. There was also that snowboarder that had to return his, I don't remember if he had to return his gold medal or was like requested to return his gold medal, but again, for hitting the bong. And it's like, who wouldn't have thought that this would have happened with snowboarders? I also point to the Dixie Chicks, which were canceled during George Bush administration in regards to opposition to the Iraqi war. Those are the easiest examples to me to remember. Big Kawasaki, I think saying Black Lives Matter more racist. Why do I need to make an exception to black people by saying BLM? Because black people are disproportionately affected by violence and police right now. That's it. That's the reason. They are more affected per capita, per person, by violence when it comes to policing than any other race in the country. So when you say Black Lives Matter, you are saying Black Lives Matter too. Because right now, they seem not to matter as much when it comes to police enforcement. Because black lives don't have the same privileges as white lives. History treats all people. IBF, welcome to the stream. I almost didn't catch you there because it's such a dark blue color. History treats people of all ethnicities badly. Yes, but at different times and different places. Big Kawasaki, what are those particulars or privileges, Dash Mickey? I doubt you've ever been pulled over for driving while white. If you lived in New York City during the stop and frisk era, black people were disproportionately, young black men disproportionately stopped and frisked more than white men, even in the same areas. If you go to trial and a black man the same age as you goes to trial for the same crime with the same attorney, and you're both convicted of the same crime by the same judge, everything you can control for, the black man is going to get more years in prison than you are, on average. The criminal justice system is not fair to black people. Historically, the United States has obviously treated black lives as less. Yes, I agree with you. You are correct, Smitty Swag. Black Lives Matter addresses the... I think it broke you up there. The usual problems that the U.S. has, or unique problems that the U.S. has regarding race from no true leftists. Agreed. Dash Mickey, are white lives being killed by white cops? Yes, but more rarely. That's the problem, or that's the point. Black lives matter, or black lives are the ones in crisis at this point. Nobody is advocating that everybody should or that we should increase the number of people getting killed by police. Anarcho Taco, it's rare that I'll engage in debates. I usually point out that a meritocracy is antithetical to generational wealth, then watch them flounder for a bit. It's rare that I'll engage in debates. I usually point out that a meritocracy. Yeah, I would agree with that. Generational wealth automatically gives some people a head start when it comes to where you're beginning in life. Dash, do some research. Yes, many more white people are being killed, my friend. So you're doing let's look at the total population of people being killed. You're not looking at it per capita, per person. There are going to be more white people killed because there's a lot more white people. That doesn't change the fact that if you're black as an individual versus a white individual, if you come in contact with the police as a black man, you're 4 times more likely to be killed. And at the time you were killed, I think it's 5 or 6 times more likely to be unarmed, to not have a weapon. Looking at the total numbers doesn't tell you anything because the total numbers are different because there's a lot more white people than there are black people. You have to look at the averages and the per capita numbers. Per person, how likely is it to affect you? Smitty Swag pointed that out as well. Excellent catch, Smitty. I appreciate that. Anarcho Taco, why are conservatives so against violins? Violins are beautiful instruments. I had no idea that they were. Chekhov, welcome back. Wikipedia says Americans kill in the Iraq War 600,000 civilians. Vietnam is more than 2 million. If you break down all U.S. wars, it's higher than Nazi Germany. Well, yeah, but if you look at all German history, it's going to be higher too. I mean, you're comparing like a 200 and something year time span to like, you know, a 15, 20 year time span. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I would also encourage you to get better sources than Wikipedia, since Wikipedia is editable. Anybody can pop into Wikipedia and make a change, and then you can snap that. But I do like the fact that you tried to grab sources. That's encouraged here. I greatly appreciate it. And again, nobody, I won't say nobody, myself personally on the show isn't arguing for a continuation of the Iraq War or the second Iraq War, for instance. So again, you and I already agree here. I think at this point, since I agree with you, maybe giving me some ideas on how this could be addressed better in America from your point of view, some policies or some ideas for how to get some traction on removing these things would be a good next step for you to take. Prison years, you said, thing isn't true. Did you know that 70% of black males go to jail at least once in their life? There are statistics, my friend. So that doesn't address what I said about the prison thing. So if you control between white and black, between male and, or between two white male and a black male for the same crime with the same history, the black man is going to get more years on average. And that absolutely is fact. You can go look up the research papers yourself. Pointing out that more black men go to jail percentage doesn't address the fact that when they go to jail for the same time with, or for the same crime, they're going to go to jail for longer. But nice segue. Both of those statements were separate. Do you realize how much 70% is? Yes, I do. Absolutely. But that's also a problem with policing in black communities. You can over-police a community, right? So to go back to my previous example, when I was talking about stop and frisk in New York City, which is where they would stop you and basically illegally search you with no cause. And then if they found something, they could arrest you, right? Well, if I make that rule and I stop 90% more black people than I do white people, I'm going to find a lot more shit on black people because I'm not looking for it on white people. That's why your 70% statistic can be massively misleading. Dash Mickey, but it is not per capita. Big point. Exactly. It also doesn't go to address anything related to BLM. This is the big Kawasaki trying to pivot to a different argument because he can't win the BLM argument. Les Speaks, are you a bit of a theory nerd like me? I have a theory cloud share with over 2 gigabytes of political, economic, and philosophical theory. If you'd like me to link, feel free to link. Smitty Swag, over-policing plus the effects of redlining still affect the black community to this day. Absolutely. The Big Kawasaki, what can't I win? So you have moved entirely from Black Lives Matter shouldn't exist or is unjustified in its existence to something about black people committing 70% of crimes. Those two things don't really go together. You're pivoting hard. Anarcho Tacos, my sometimes updated cloud share. Thank you for the link. I'll check it out probably this coming week a little bit. From Nature.com, researchers looked at the responses to 1.2 million 911 emergency calls in the U.S. in a U.S. city and plotted the use of force involving a gun across neighborhoods according to their racial composition. White officers were more likely to use a gun than were black officers, and more likely to do so in predominantly black neighborhoods. By one estimate, black men are 2.5 times more likely than white men to be killed by police during their lifetime. In another study, black men who were fatally shot by police seem to be twice as likely as white people to be unarmed. Stats like that, studies like that, Kawasaki, are why Black Lives Matter became a thing. This is no different than the Wounded Warrior Project. An awareness and charitable organization that came out to point out that veterans that were injured in war need financial help sometimes getting prosthetic limbs. It's not saying that no other people who are amputees matter. It's saying, you know what? There are a lot of people that went to war that were disproportionately affected by this, that per capita are more likely to be missing limbs. Maybe we should focus on making their lives, focus on the group with the most harm and bring them up to the level of everybody else. And then we can start raising everybody else too. When I look at data and evidence and studies and see that black people, black men specifically, are 2 to 3 times more likely than a white guy to die in their lifetime to police, and then I see that they're twice as likely to be unarmed when they're shot as compared to a white person, there's something wrong there. There needs to be some addressing of this. And again, It's not saying that white lives don't matter or Hispanic lives don't matter. It's saying that this problem seems to be affecting black people much worse. So police brutality and death to police officers is a problem, and we need to start here because this is the community being affected the worst by it. Big Kawasaki, never heard a liberal talk about cancel culture. The whole episode will be up on YouTube, or you can bring up a question if you are free. The basic gist of my point is this is nothing new. It's been going on for as long as capitalism is a thing. The Dr. Seuss thing is hilariously overblown. It wasn't canceled. It was the publisher choosing to quit publishing 6 books. 6 books that weren't selling, by the way, because apparently racism does not sell in this country as well as it once used to. I personally think it's just something to keep you outraged if you're a conservative and distracted from all the other things that actually need to be addressed in this country. But you are more than welcome to go watch the full VOD on Twitch or watch the full video on YouTube or ask a specific question if you have a specific question. Big Kawasaki, yeah, since they commit so many crimes, they can't own a gun. Okay, so by your theory, they shouldn't be shot. Thank you. Anarcho Taco, don't call me a lib. At CM's at Smitty Swag. Big Kawasaki, you're fucking kidding. You're comparing this to Wounded Warrior. Absolutely, I'm comparing it to Wounded Warrior because if you said, oh, I'm going to donate to Wounded Warrior Project, I agree with what Wounded Warrior Project is doing. I could say, don't all amputees matter? Not just the veterans? Don't all amputees matter? Are you saying only wounded veterans matter? Only amputees who were wounded in war, they're the only ones that matter? Because that's what you sound like when you're saying, don't all lives matter? That's exactly what you sound like. Both organizations are drawing attention to a group that is disproportionately affected, that is being affected by this a lot more than it should be. In one case, having to function without a prosthesis, without an artificial leg or arm or hand. And in the other case, being affected disproportionately by police violence, being more likely to die by 2.5 times as compared to a white man. And being 2 to 3 times more likely to be completely unarmed when you're shot to death. Big Kawasaki, I think every race experiences this just as much and more. Well, you are demonstrably wrong, but you are free to go find evidence to actually support your feeling. Facts, to quote Ben Shapiro, don't care about your feelings. You need to present evidence here. My family were slaves in Turkey. All of them died. I'm sorry. That sucks. Every race experiences this much more. I have no idea how that relates to anything we're talking about. I'm talking about the entire world. I'm talking about the United States of America, specifically the Black Lives Matter movement. Quit trying to pivot. I should talk with Bryson Gray. I have no idea who Bryson Gray is. The phone number is toll-free. Conservative callers get priority, or specifically anybody who disagrees with me on a topic. Anytime I am live, which is Sundays 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, the phone lines are open. Not hiding from anybody. Now, that being said, anybody who calls on the current topic gets priority. Anybody who calls on the previous show's topic gets priority. If somebody tries to ambush me out of the blue with something that I'm not immediately versed on, I will have to reschedule that call, but they are more than welcome to call in. I should check him out. I'm unfamiliar with him, but sure. No true leftist. That doesn't address what BLM is in favor of. They want to fix policing in the United States. You're detailing the whole topic again. Yeah, he's just trying to... the evidence doesn't support where he's coming from. His initial stat that he wanted to throw out was completely irrelevant and explainable. So now he's just trying to pivot away from the topic, but that's fine. Big Kawasaki is a Christian rapper that has 140K on YouTube. I don't care. Like I said, I would be interested in his specific views on particular topics and policies, and if he has evidence and arguments to actually support them. Tell me how every race experiences racial injustice, or specifically, how does the average white male experience racial injustice? Okay, so Dash Mickey, the way that he's going to answer this question, or the way that he has tried to answer it previously, is to pointing at different races around the world. So you need to limit your scope when you've been speaking with somebody who does this or has demonstrated that they do this before. That's why he pointed to Turkey and pointed to different ethnic experiences throughout history, all of which are irrelevant entirely to the discussion about BLM, which is specifically trying to address police injustices in this country, police reform in this country, because police violence is overly affecting the black community right now. So try to limit your scope. Stephen Vega, sorry, just joining, so I don't know if you've already covered this, but what is your thoughts on the COVID bill that just passed the Senate, excuse me, and the Big Kawasaki? You're right, man, I'm wrong. Man, I don't expect you to change your opinion overnight. That's not how this works. I know we all learn and grow, et cetera, et cetera. If you can't defeat my argument right now, Stephen, I'll answer your question in a second. If you can't defeat my argument right now, that's entirely okay. Go find evidence and arguments until you can. Or, if you can't, change your views. It's not about winning or losing. It's about finding the truth. Debate and discussion isn't about dunking on each other, or it shouldn't be. And both sides confuse this far too often. That's why I haven't insulted you personally. I've pointed to some of the tactics that you've used. I've pointed to things that you have said in this stream previously. I've pointed out some of the flaws that I see in your thinking, but I'm not saying you're a terrible, human being and your argument is shit as a result. That's not the way this works. The goal should be, okay, you know what? Chris made a valid point there. I can't address that right now. Let me go research to see if I can further bolster my argument, or if it is something where his argument does make more sense and his evidence is stronger, and maybe I should switch my position. That's the difference. Okay? So there's nothing wrong with coming in here and being uninformed on a subject. There's nothing wrong with coming in here and trying out arguments. I fully support that. And I don't expect you to change your position overnight, because that would be pretty crazy and ridiculous too. But I do expect you to go back and try to find better arguments on this position. And if you keep doing that and you can't, then you do need to change your view at some point, because you're flying in the face of reason and evidence at that point. Stephen, have we covered the thoughts on the COVID bill? It's a shame that we couldn't get the $15 an hour minimum wage hike in there. I understand entirely why we couldn't, because we need Joe Manchin, not Steve Manchin. We need Joe Manchin in West Virginia, and West Virginia is not exactly the most progressive area, so he does have to cater to that. We need Kristen Sinema in Arizona as Democrats. We can't afford to lose that Democratic majority. I think the passing of a COVID relief bill is vastly overdue. I wish we could have done more with it, but I think it was the best we could get through immediately. I also think it was exceedingly stupid to cut checks for $1,400 instead of a $2,000 flat. just from a purely political standpoint. There are going to be so many people that can't do math in their heads that see that $1,400 and $600 add up to $2,000 that I would have just rather cut a flat $2,000. That being said, I mean, I'm far progressive on the, we should have had monthly stimulus checks going out for the entire extent of this, just like Canada, United Kingdom, Denmark, South Korea, all the other, democratized capitalist countries. Big Kawasaki, I could have a 5-hour conversation. I just really don't care. Okay, then you're really displaying you're not caring by arguing about this. No, I just came to meet the first conservative to go to the left. Hardly the first, my friend. Hardly the first. Dash Mickey, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, obviously, hardly the first. I feel that it really, from Steven, I feel that it really isn't addressing COVID, though. All the things you listed are just a left wish list, not COVID related. So it's not, it's the COVID Relief Act, not the Addressing COVID Act. So you've had tons of people that are out of work, which is why you wanted the stimulus check back in people's hand. It's why you wanted the extension of eviction moratoriums where people aren't getting evicted because they weren't able to work. Those sorts of things. It's meant to relieve the population from the effects of being unemployed more so than it is to establish vaccination centers. It's relief from COVID, not like, the COVID Defense Act or something along those lines. Do I agree with everything that was in the bill? No. Do I wish there were more things that we could have done with the bill? Yes. Do I agree with you that the $15 an hour minimum wage, for example, was not COVID specific? Yes, absolutely. Do I still wish they could have gotten that in there? Yes. Why? Because the filibuster is still a thing and there's no compromising with Republicans when they're never even going to let your bill get to the floor. So that would be one of the reasons why you have to do something like that via reconciliation by including it in with another budget measure. Valid, but from Stephen again, valid, but opponents say there's less than 20% of the bill that actually goes to COVID relief. That may or may not be factually true. I would have to look into it. I wasn't doing a COVID relief bill show today, so I'm not going to disagree with you on the face of it, but again, I would have to look into it. That being said, tons of bills have multiple different things in them, so that's not overly surprising to me. CM Smitty, as someone who used to be a conservative who progressed left, I hope you start doing genuine research and find out what's true to you instead of spewing out far-right talking points. Exactly. Referring back to Big Kawasaki. Brother, I'm just following the evidence and the best arguments I can find. If you have better ones, I'll follow that right back to my previous conservative beliefs. There's a reason college-educated people tend to be more liberal, and the further education or the further educated you get, the more left progressive you tend to go. Follow evidence, facts, reasoning, etc. If you have better arguments and evidence than me, then I will take that into account. And if I can't find better arguments and evidence than what you're presenting, then I will adjust my views accordingly. Dash Mickey, it's better to have accurate knowledge than just be a parrot. Exactly. And Stephen, you may want to catch the show from the beginning, my friend. We are kind of winding down at this point. I think we're going to wrap it up in about 5 minutes because we're already 30 minutes over. But I do appreciate you tuning in as always. Any last minute comments, questions from chat? Well, I agree that college education helps those who go think for themselves. Does it really impress liberalism, or is it just critical thinking taught that allows those to see it for themselves? It's the critical thinking taught. If you follow facts, evidence, reason, logic, data, etc., instead of relying on feelings-based arguments. We'll just give you the easiest example right now available in American politics. If you follow evidence, logic, and reason, you are not going to come to Marjorie Taylor Greene's conclusion that Jewish space lasers caused California wildfires, because there's no evidence to support that. There's no logic and reasoning that gets you there. So policies like that tend to start going away. And unfortunately, Republicans have a lot of non-evidence supported policies right now. As we just saw, Kawasaki's opposition to BLM didn't have the evidence to back it up. Yet, he may go reform and come back, which is, again, I encourage. Okay. COVID, right? The existence of COVID, you know, it's a Democratic hoax. It's being overblown. You know, oh, we'll be back to 0 cases shortly. Those are all paraphrases of what Donald Trump was selling, right? That's not what any of the data, any of the science was saying. So if you follow the data and the science and the critical and thinking about the subject critically, instead of just swallowing what you already want to believe, it starts leading you out of a lot of those things. But thank you for the question, Mickey. And on that note, everybody, I think we are going to wrap up for today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and especially to the most active participants, Smitty Swag, Anarcho Taco, Dash Mickey, and Big Kawasaki. Even thank you to you. Also, thank you to, I think it was Chekhov, who was coming in with the harsh criticism of Iraq or Middle Eastern policy, and to No True Leftist for dropping by. I appreciate everybody who came in. If you enjoy the comment, like, follow, subscribe, whatever platform you're on, and I will see everybody next week, every Sunday, 2 to 4 p.m. And you can also catch recaps and clips on the show channel at YouTube, or you can go directly to the website, www.theleftspeaks.com. Thank you, everybody, and we are going to be wrapping up from here. Have a wonderful weekend.